Welcome to another episode of the Roost Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Pitcher. Today's guest we have on is Bryan Whitlock. He is the Assistant Director of Athletic Performance at the University of Minnesota. He works with track and field, cross country, and the tennis teams there. Prior to that, he was a GA at Gardner-Webb University. He also played Division III football at Powerhouse Mount Union, which everyone should know who that is, with how successful they are. And where we first actually originally met was Buffalo State, way back in 2010, which seems like light years ago. I'm sure you probably still have, connect with people like Des Howard, Rich Pete, Anthony Sanders. When you're part of a team like we didn't win a lot of games, but we had a lot of great guys on the team.
Facts. So true.
So welcome, Bryan, and excited to dive into a variety of different questions, especially a lot with track and field today. But what I want to start with is, can you just tell us what is your roots? Who is Bryan?
For me, excuse me, man, that's a deep question, but I'm trying not to take too much time about it. But it just all comes from where I was born and raised, Rochester, New York, and how my family was very big in athletics and wasn't a family that was big on quitting. You start what you finish, you kind of push through it. And throughout my time going up or going through this field, that's basically what it was. Like if I start something, I'm gonna finish it. I'm gonna put my best into it, the best of what I know at the time, what I'm able to do at the time, and just learn from it from there. So that's my roots, man. Being back at home, Rochester, New York, learning how to grind it out and make the most out of the opportunities given to me.
Yeah, I think a lot of our generation coming through, my parents are kind of the same way. They're like, if we're gonna invest money into this, they're like, you're gonna go play Pee Wee football, or like you're gonna go do this sport. I'm not putting this money in unless you're gonna go through the entire season. And even if
Yeah.
there's times during that season where it was bumpy, you didn't feel like you wanted to keep continuing, they're like, no, you're not gonna quit. And I think that's a lost art almost at times now with our youth sports or some of our athletes. When things don't go the way, they want to switch to another school or this is just not for me. I guess how do we teach that or how do we implement that with the society that we kind of have now?
You just gotta let them stay in the storm, basically. You gotta let them stay under pressure. When the pressure gets tough, you don't pull them out. You teach them how to become a diamond in that moment. Because that's all I see on social media or even some parents back in my hometown and how they treat their kids. Everybody wants to be the star, but the star isn't born through convenience. A star is born through adversity. And that's the only way you can become a star or become as great as you can be is when you go through some tough times. Everything's not going to be perfect. Everything's not going to be ideal. You're not going to be the one favored all the time. But if you're able to still put your best foot forward, prove people wrong during that time, continue to grow and use that as like a battery in your back in order to just prove all the naysayers wrong. It's kind of just like, oh, okay, now you're a rising star. Now you're actually becoming that guy. Because if that stuff didn't tear you down, then once you get up to the top, then nothing else is going to tear you down then because you already been through it. You already developed that callus. So I
Mhm.
don't think a lot of athletes these days are building calluses. Is so fragile. Oh, I'm not the number one person. All right, let me leave. Let me go here. Oh, I'm not getting the ball. I'm not like whatever the case may be for the sport. I'm not liking it. So sometimes you just got to stay in it, stick through it.
And do you find that's more at some of those kind of like top three sports, like more so like the football, the basketball, the baseball, versus maybe some of the Olympic sports where it could be track and field, tennis, golf? Do you see that less there, or is it just across the board? It's just it doesn't matter what sport it is, kids are just jumping ship.
From say from my experience, I would say, but what I've seen the most is definitely for some of the top sports, especially when you're in the college setting, you see it more around the revenue sports than you do in the Olympic sports. But when it comes to the Olympic sports, instead of athletes leaving because, oh, I'm not the number one person, they feel like they'll have a better opportunity somewhere else, or we're not winning here per se. So let me kind of go somewhere else. So I guess yeah, that answers your question a little bit in terms of is more so I experience it more so at the revenue sports than I do the Olympic sports.
Yeah, it's like you just love to see. if you're not doing good there, well, what are you doing to make the team better? Or like what can you do to recruit people to that school to like that organization or that sport becomes better versus I'm just gonna go on the winning tales of some other school and some other sport. It just seems like why wouldn't you want to like come to that challenge and like you said, face that adversity and try to make the situation that you have better?
Because
I don't
because
know.
I feel like some people, because there was a couple of athletes at the at some other institutions that I've been at, to where they at the moment are that person, but it's a lot of pressure,
Yeah.
and holding that weight for some people is it's not meant for everybody. But then, like how we were talking about in the beginning, how are you coming up? Like, did you build enough calluses? Did you go through enough adversity? Did you go through enough like challenging times to where when you are in that light, when you are on top of that pedestal for like the lineup or whatever, can you handle it? Can you make the most of it? Are you that person that that team can count on? And some people can't, and sometimes that's why they leave. Like, I'm good, but this is just too much pressure. I need to be, as surprising as this may sound, for some people that leave because they don't want to be like that top person. And I know one athlete in particular that did that, and I just found that kind of pretty interesting, but to each his own.
And the pressures that they deal with now, like in the comparison to probably the pressures we dealt with like 10, 15 years ago are definitely night and day difference, especially with social media, constant criticism. Either they're with you because you're doing really good, or like you're the worst player in the world, and like how did you miss that shot? Like you're terrible, like you're just 5-star athlete, or you're like just pro player, like you shouldn't be like making those mistakes. And it's like everyone's human. You're gonna make
Yeah,
mistakes. It's gonna happen. So not everyone's gonna be perfect 24/7. Not everyone can play at a 5-star status, pro status every single game. But unfortunately, the reality is that's what people expect because of, the money component and what some of these athletes receive. And it's hard to kind of change that mindset.
yeah, I agree. I agree.
So let's get into, one of your main sports that you work with there at University of Minnesota, track and field. It's quote unquote a team sport because you obviously have to get enough points to um, win at the end of the day. So each obviously individual athlete has to be able to score points to contribute to that. But what goes into training multiple different levels and types of athletes, right? Like you got your throwers, you got your distance, your sprints, your jumpers. What is your training philosophy and how do you change up training between those different entities?
So when it comes to training different people or different events, it's more so getting to understand that sport. Definitely break it down to sport. You just don't want to randomly just be like, oh, okay, well, I'm coaching the sport, so I'm gonna do what I've been doing in terms of a sport that is not related. So when it comes to like the throwers, it's definitely like a strength and power um, type of event. So it's learning the sport. I haven't thrown, I didn't throw, and if I did throw, it was definitely in high school, and it wasn't like it was a it was me doing the event just to get like a meet, to get a track meet under my belt in order for me to qualify for like sectionals or something.
Hmm.
It wasn't like, oh, I'm actually learning how to throw shot properly because this is my thing. So definitely wasn't taught well, but it's definitely just learning the sport in the ways that you can. I was taking the USA TF certification course to be a coach back before I got into the strength conditioning field, and just taking what I know and what I love from the sport because I love watching it and just watching the mechanics, watching them, how they move. And then when I'm working with coaches, getting the deeper insight of, all right, what are we looking for? Or where's the power coming from? Or what do these athletes need? Basically picking their brain as a coach to get the actual performing the event aspect out of them. And then I just take that and I just put my knowledge when I know through the field of just power schemes, strength schemes, and just break it down. All right, what does this event actually need compared to this event? And sometimes it's 3 to 4 different programs, depending on the athlete, depending on the event, just to make sure they all get what they need.
Yeah, and especially there, people don't think about when you actually go and watch track and field, but like it's highly technical. Like if
Yeah.
you miss a step, if you miss a position, if you miss whatever it is, like that could be seconds, that could be, half an inch to a foot, especially if you're throwing, the shot, the javelin, the discus, whatever that may be. And that's what, wins and loses. I mean, just like anything else, right? Like if you're running the football, like you got a half a yard to go and you don't get the half a yard, and that's the first down, that's gonna win you the game, right? It all comes down to inches at the end of the day, or a couple seconds. So, probably on your end, probably those things in the weight room are going to make a huge difference to be able to set them forward. Now, looking at track and field, one thing I've worked with track and field in the past, and sometimes a lot of track and field coaches tend to do a lot of the strength and conditioning and the training for their athletes, or if they've just been put in positions where maybe they don't have the appropriate strength and conditioning staff to be able to do that for them. Maybe what's some advice for strength coaches that are working with that specified sport and integrating and embedding themselves with those coaches to allow them to work alongside them versus like work against each other.
Just got to build a good rapport, build a good relationship. Um, because it is different. A lot of track and field coaches do their own strength and conditioning for the team. That's something that is known. So when it comes to being a strength coach and working with those coaches, it's building a rapport. It's not about ego at that moment. Because once you get into the egos, then you're taking away from the kids. It's all about the kids at the end of the day. You guys are there to do a job. One coach is there to actually coach the sport. The other coach is there to do the strength conditioning aspect. So working together is very important because not only are you guys on the same page and it builds like a better collaboration, but then also the athletes get what they need. So when I collaborate with my coach, I'm getting the understanding and perspective of what his annual plan looks like, when or how his practices look like, how many throws they're taking, or how many drills they're doing. Are they doing plyos while they're at practice? Because then some of that stuff is like, all right, there's no need to overload or double down on that on my end. Well, some other areas we can hit, or throughout the year, what time are we backing off, or um, like, are we hitting them? Are we trying to get the body to have a certain type of stimulus this many days out, 7 days, 14 days out away from a big competition? So communicating with that coach, you get an understanding of how he's planning and when he wants his athletes to pop. And then I give my ideas of how this can happen, and we just make the magic happen.
So do you find yourself as a strength coach spending a lot of time at practices, going to events, being involved in these, I guess, coaching or slash team meetings to try to integrate and embed yourself? And if you do, I guess maybe what do you recommend for other strength coaches and how to approach or do that? Because maybe there's some situations where a coach may not like want to automatically welcome that practitioner or that support person in to be able to do that.
I try to go to practices for all my sports. Honestly, the only one that's very difficult is cross country because they just run around the city. So it's not like I can actually jog with them or anything. But uh, no, that's something I learned when I was an intern. Is just that if you can be out of practice, be out of practice. Um, because it makes a difference not only for you learning the sport, but that also helps build a relationship with you and your coach and with the athletes. Because now the only time they it's not them just coming to the weight room being the only time that they see. It's like you become more to them in that aspect. But I try to go as many practices as I can, depending on what my schedule is looking like. Sometimes I'm only able to get out there probably like once or twice. Sometimes I'm able to get out there multiple times. But when it comes to track and field, the schedule is a little bit different. So there's multiple practices for some, and for some people I can't get there. For some people I can, or if it's just a little bit ways from where my office is, based on how the campus is set up. So uh, but that's how I approach it. Go to the practices, learn as much as you can, see as much as you can, because then when you ask a lot of questions, then that opens a dialogue for you and the coach to talk about what you're looking at or to get an understanding of it, and I can help you program a little bit more as well. Then when it comes to just the meetings, so we meet weekly. Um, my event coach and with the athletic trainer, we meet weekly to talk about the injury report, what such and such can or can't do, and the plans going forward. So it's never a moment where, all right, we go a couple weeks without talking. Sometimes there's multiple days within the week to where we are talking because something changed, something popped up, somebody got hurt, or we're looking a little bit better than anticipated based on the previous week's training. So here's some adjustments. But it's just communication. We communicate a lot, and I think that's what contributes to our success.
Yeah, that's what I tell a lot of young practitioners. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Over communicate if you have to, and find out how people like to receive communication, right? Is it
Yeah.
text? Is it email? Is it face to face? Is it a FaceTime? Is it a voice message? If you can capitalize on figuring out how those people like to communicate, then us are going to get a faster and quicker response to essentially what the goal is: assist and help the athlete out, right? Versus like if someone doesn't check their emails and you email all the time and you get frustrated because they're not answering emails, but if you just picked up the phone and talked to them for 2 minutes and yeah, I'll give you an answer in like 2 seconds by just doing that, then just take the time to figure that out about and that's not only for your staff, but even the athletes as well. They're kind of the same way. That was something I did at the last position I was at. You know, when I did my one-on-one assessments, like one of my first initial questions, I was like, how would you prefer for me to communicate with you? Like, how do you want me to do that? And if they then tell me that and I write that down, then when I go to communicate with them, if they don't communicate back, I can go back to that and say, hey, this is what you told me how you want to be communicated. I've tried to go through this path. You're not responding. So
Hmm.
are you avoiding me or what is the actual way that you want me to communicate with you?
Right.
And I like what you said there, with being at the practices and the events as much as possible. I think as an athlete and coach, one, they like to see you involved. They like to see that you're supporting. They like to see that you're going through it with them. Um, the trust, the relationships, the bonds that you can build by just being in their space. Like even if you're there for 30 minutes, you're not talking to them, but like they're there and like they glance over and they see you there, right?
Hmm.
You probably had situations where you don't show up during the week, or if you're not there at least once or twice a week, they probably give you a bunch of shit if you're not showing up. Because I've had probably the same thing too. It's like, well, I haven't seen you in a couple days. Where you been at? Like I thought you were gonna come out to our practices more often.
It's funny because the tennis team, the girls that we have right now, they so for tennis there's a lineup and everything. So and they started doing one for the coaches and the rest of the support staff based on it's all fun and games, but it's just based on just basically what's going on that what happened that week or how many times do you show up to practice or did you come up to
Oh, they track
one of the
y'all.
matches. It's so funny. So it's the last time they had a home match, walked into the team lounge because we all eat like pregame lunch, pre-match lunch together. To go in there and there's a whiteboard and it was like, yeah, Coach Witt, you dropped a couple spots because the workout that you put us in last week was actually kind of tough and we kind of like that in the joking way like,
Yeah.
oh, my legs are sore and everything. And it's just all fun and games of how much they pay attention. It's a couple people moved up or it shuffles in the rankings in terms of, okay, you came to a couple practices. It's all fun and games that they do that I like it. It's something unique and it lets you know that they are paying attention and you are interacting with them. Of course, nothing is like, so it's not like, oh, if we're putting you at six, we really like hate you.
Right.
It's just like, oh,
I think
we'll find like
you're
yeah, we'll
building that
find one.
camaraderie and community, right? Like it's
Yeah.
fun and games. Like you're probably, talking trash to them, they're talking trash to you, but like that just shows at the end of the day, like both sides care about each other. Like they care about that you're there. And it's like on the opposite end, like you care when you're there to help them. And
Hmm.
it's very hard to break that once you kind of had that consistency with them, especially if, with how high turnover sometimes is, to be able to then have another person come in and be able to like take over that role and to be able to like build that relationship that you built for X amount of years, like then it becomes a huge challenge.
Yeah.
So you talked about working with like your athletic trainer. Do you work with other staff, sports dietitians, mental conditioning coaches? How do you interact with other, support staff to then support your athletes at the end of the day?
So I talked to the athletic trainer the most. Like that's just definitely direct conversation between me and the athletic trainer because a lot of things happen, a lot of things change. So I'll talk to them the most. I do know of our um, nutritionists and our dietitians, but not too much communication with them because what they do with the athlete, that's definitely just like one on one. I can't. There's nothing else I can contribute to that except for helping the nutritionists and our dietitians just kind of echo what they're saying or the info that they're giving out. When it comes to sports psych, uh, I talk to sports psych often, not because of the information, oh, what's going on with the athletes and everything, but how, as a coach, can I create like a better environment? How can I, on my end, what is a way I can help the psychology of the athlete? Like trying to better myself to create a better environment for the athlete. But when it comes to communicating to the support staff about an actual or directly about an athlete, the only people I do that with is the athletic trainers. But everybody else, I know who they are, communicate with them. We have a good relationship. But uh, in regards to, oh, is this athlete eating this, athlete doing that, or is this athlete mental spot? Try not to get into that, allow that privacy to be private, and just try to better myself to um, contribute to those areas as much as possible.
Yeah, I think the more we can try to utilize, some of those practitioners, especially you mentioned like sports psych, right? Whether it's if it's bettering you and yourself as the strength coach, like that's going to allow you to then better your communication, being able to look at body language, if there's athletes going through certain challenges or obstacles, like how to navigate around that, or like maybe an athlete's going through something in particular, and there's obviously some strength coaches out there that like they just have a one type approach, but like to be able to pick up those vibes and know what's going on with that athlete and then getting that feedback and then be able to then curtail like, hey, today, like I'm not gonna be able to push this person really hard. They're going through something. I'll kind of reassess when they come back and wait the next time, or I'll see how they're doing in practice, get some communication from the coach and see how they're doing out there. And it's like then maybe I'll have a different approach on how I'm gonna like talk or speak to that person because maybe right now they're just not in the right headspace to give me their 100%. So like instead of me
Mhm.
forcing them to give me 100%, I just know like, hey, I'm gonna take like a 10% off, 15% off because if they don't figure out that stuff first, they're probably not gonna be able to give or push as hard as I would like them to. And I
Mhm.
think the more that we can be aware of those situations and aware of that, um, we'll be able to, even though they're a group, let's say, on the weight room floor, we can then have more of an individual approach from person to person.
Most definitely.
Do you guys have any type of like return to play process set up with like your sports medicine athletic training staff? Because a lot of times athletes will get injured, they'll feel better, they'll be have less pain, but that doesn't always mean that strength or let's say conditioning wise, they're 100% ready to return to play. Do you guys do anything in particular for that? So it's kind of a smooth transition back out into the field.
So whenever there's a major injury, like a surgery or something, then the athletic trainers they take that role. They're in the doctors' meetings. They see the X-rays, the MRIs, understand what the actual procedure is or what the actual damage is. And once they are out of their like, let's just use surgery for example. Once it's been some time since they surgery, then the athletic trainer takes on that role until they say, hey, they progress well. We maxed out all the stuff that we can do here in the training room with what we got. Now it's time to ease them in back into the weight room. And at that moment, that's when we will sit and discuss, all right, what's this person's um, limitations or what do we really need to focus on? And what do we stay away from right now? So we tag team that because they're also doing some rehab in the athletic training room. So we're trying to hit all aspects. So we sit, we talk, we discuss, and then I develop a plan based on um, what the limitations are and what I can or can't do, and just progress from there, basically. So I typically like to increase or reintroduce mobility because definitely don't want to lose that. You want to get definitely the full range or the range of motion back in whatever area that happened. Just so number one, the injury doesn't occur again. But then also once you're coming back, return to play at that moment, it's okay to start from scratch. All right, let's rebuild you. Let's rebuild a great foundation, good strength, good pillar. Just so when we do get you back to the strength that you were at previously, there's a less chance of this. Hopefully, this is less chance of this reoccurring. So there's moments where they will do certain tests in the athletic training room. In my, from me, I will use the force plate that we have. So sometimes we use the force plates as an assessment tool in the beginning of the year, get a baseline, and then we try to track it as much as possible, much as we could do, just at least a couple times a month, or at least once or twice a month, just so when something does take them out, okay, here's where you were when you first started. Here's what we got you to. This is like your peak based on training. So using those metrics and having to go through it again, it gives us a better idea of when you are actually good or better to return to play.
So I guess what numbers are you tracking essentially with a force plate? Like, are you looking at fatigue? Are you looking at asymmetries? Are you looking at whether they're, jumping and landing off their left to right leg, either bilaterally or single leg?
Yeah, you're looking at the asymmetries, looking at their force output, looking at their vert. Sometimes, depending on the sport, you're looking at their RSI, reactive strength index. So it just really depends on that sport, but there's definitely the force, the asymmetry, and like the braking force that you could kind of tell, all right, is this athlete prepared to go back out and do their sport?
So let's say an athlete does have like either a lower limb or upper limb asymmetry. Does that do you guys like what do you specifically integrate with that? Is it just more single leg upper body work, lower body work, depending where the asymmetry is? Or how do you guys as a team, I guess, adjust that to decrease possible upstream and downstream injuries or injuries that could be happening at that specific point?
Yeah, it's definitely single leg work. You definitely want to build it up. Not saying we're trying to get them uh, symmetrical because it depends on the sport. And for a good amount of Olympic sports, you're typically using one side more than the other.
You're
So
dominant,
there's
yeah.
going to be there's going to be some asymmetries that are completely fine. But like I was saying, compared to what the data you had on the force plate previously, let's say if their right leg is the dominant side and the right leg is the one that got like injured, okay, let's get that leg back to what that number was. But
Mhm.
you also got to take care of the opposite sides just so that one, of course, you don't want to neglect that side and that one becomes at risk of getting hurt because it's doing most of the load handling at the moment. But you just want to get it back to the numbers just as much as possible, whatever that peak or that baseline number was, because then you feel more confident in putting an athlete back out there. So it's definitely, let's say if it's going to be for like an ACL or something, you definitely want to get their balance back. You definitely want to get their confidence in moving unilaterally back. So you're not going to do as much of bilateral movements, especially in the beginning. Let's really focus on getting this coordination, getting nerves to kind of respond, get used to being back on that one limb after a little bit before we start just loading you bilaterally and doing something more advanced.
Yeah, I think a lot of times athletes, one of the biggest things, especially from a mental standpoint, is just the fear of re-injuring themselves.
Yeah,
That's
and that's why you take them through those kind of things. It's not just, oh, let's just do a split squat or let's just do a reverse lunge in terms of unilateral. It's like, okay, let's see how you do in terms of just balancing. standing on one leg, tossing like a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball into your left and right, seeing how you reach, see how you hold it, or being on an RX pad, trying to balance yourself, or rolling not from a huge height, but well, not from a low height, but rolling on your back and coming up, standing up on one leg uh in terms of an ACL. How can I explain it if I didn't make sense right there? So from sitting down on the box and kind of like popping up or
Mhm.
kind of rolling on your back on the box and popping up, getting on that one leg, you're really trying to get that athlete comfortable with moving or putting pressure on that leg solely,
Or being
trying to
like
get
weird, or being in weird possible positions that they might have to face
exactly,
regardless in whatever the sport is going to be. And like, can you be comfortable, putting load, putting force into the ground on that leg? Because you're going to have to do it regardless, anyways,
yeah.
and putting
So
in this
just putting
situation.
you're just putting athletes in different positions, comfortable but uncomfortable positions to where
Mhm.
there's not like a high chance of re-injuring that area, but put in a position to where, oh, I'm confident to move on this leg, or now I can progress, or things are getting better. So those like the ways you kind of like push those boundaries, push those limits.
Mm. Do you see a lot? I mean, obviously, I just see from a social media standpoint, but do you see a lot more strength coaches integrating more single leg work than before? Just due to the point where there's the specialty bars, and just some of the stuff that you might see out there. I mean, a lot of times back in the days, like you're gonna squat, you're gonna deadlift, you're gonna bench, you're gonna do all this bilateral work. But now I've kind of seen it's like you don't have to do just back squat all the time. It's like we have so many different squat variations, and there's 1,000 ways that you can essentially implement this. It's going to still get you gains or progress. Have you seen any changes like that for people's approaches and how they're programming from that standpoint?
Not changes like that. Just me coming through the field during my time as an intern and being a full-time strength coach. I've seen a lot of variations. I've seen people just get away from the back squat just so you just throw in a new variation, create a new stimulus. Don't let it be so monotonous in terms of your training. So is you see people on social media showing a lot of it now, but I think that's something that's always been kind of going on, just the unilateral training, different variations. It's just not that many people were either posting it up at the time or technology definitely wasn't
Mhm.
where it is right now, sharing a lot of the content of like, all right, what is your unilateral progression? But I think it's relatively the same. I think it's just posted more often.
Besides the stimulus, because obviously we want to continue to keep creating, different and new stimuluses, do you find having that change and exercise and movements definitely helps with keeping the athletes a little bit more bought in and having kind of those tweaks here and there versus let's say you're doing the same exact movement for, I don't know, 8, 12, 16 weeks in a row?
Yeah. Yeah, because something different, they find it fun or something refreshing. And but then you got to keep the progressive overload. So even if the movement may be the same, all right, what are we doing now? Are we doing time under tension or are we doing some accommodative resistance? Are we doing some overload eccentrics? And all that can be done with like the back squat. But then there's times to where, okay, if we want to load more, if we figured out that we have somewhat reached or we've been going through it for a bit for the back squat, front squat. All right, let's get the belt squat out, or let's go ahead and let's get the safety bar out, do some half fills or some safety bar squats, kind of changing that load and variation to create more of a stimulus, but then also the athletes is kind of like, oh, okay, this is going to be tough, or this is going to be fun, or I like these, and you get more of an effort, you get more of a buy-in. I guess you could say that as well when you do that.
Yeah, and kind of final thing I want to wrap up with is how do you, as a strength coach or a practitioner now, relate to this up and coming generation that's coming through? I mean, it seems like the college world is like the wild wild west. Social media is not going to go anyway anytime soon. The way people think and communicate is definitely different. So, how do people coming up in the field relate and work with some of these athletes that may be totally different in how people used to approach it even 5, 10 years ago?
I mean, you just got to understand the area that you understand the people that you're working with. for me, I just always go with the perspective of just respect who you're working with, respect who you're with. In that way, you learn more about the athlete. And like I was talking about in the beginning, learning how they like to be communicated with, how you like to handle things. Because we know we can't do, uh, like back in the day, all the punishment or the uh, early morning type of disciplines that we either were a part of or we got to do. Like that's
We've
not a
all been
thing.
there.
Yeah, we've all been there. It's not a thing anymore. Which is okay. It's not bad, but you just got to take a different approach of trying to hold your athletes accountable, and that begins with establishing uh establishing respect, knowing who you're working with, knowing who you're talking to, and just knowing what buttons to push. Not in a bad way, but it's like, hey, I gotta get you locked in. I gotta get you focused, or we gotta get this working, and just setting the culture. I feel like if you definitely set like a standard or like, yeah, if you set the standard and how the respect is or how the culture is going to be, and you stay consistent and holding them accountable to that, then you'll be completely fine with whoever comes through.
Yeah, I think if everyone's on the same page, speaking the same message and holding the same standards, that helps. But I think where the breakdown comes is like your standard's different, the coaches is different, the athletic trainer is different, and not everyone's on the same page. And then for an athlete, that becomes super confusing because everyone's standards or levels are just all over the place. And then, as at being former athletes, you're going to try to
Yeah.
find a loophole somewhere to get around to skirt around whatever that may be. So but if across the board, like you're going to each of these entities and they're all saying the same thing, it's like, all right, well, there's nothing really I can do. Like, I'm either going to have to do this, I'm going to have to follow through, or like everyone's going to tell me the same thing and there's going to be the same consequence, and everyone's going to hold me to that, like, regardless of what's going to happen. So, last thing before we head out, if you were to pick one movement for a track and field athlete to do in the weight room, what would it be?
Sled pushes, probably push.
Love it.
Yeah, man,
I'm a big prowler sled guy. It
yeah,
definitely
it
builds
hits
a great foundation and
it
base no matter what you do with it.
it hits everything. Like if this is gonna be one movement and you need to get the power, the strength, their endurance, man, the sled
Even
push, the
technique
prowler
and
push
form,
is
right?
it.
Getting that nice
Yes,
forward lean and being able to like actually feel what putting force in the ground is because you have a weight behind you. Like, not many things can replicate that.
yeah, correct. And that would be the one. If it was like, hey, you get to choose one. All right, this is the one I'm going. No doubt, no hesitation.
Fantastic. Bryan, really appreciate you coming on. I will be putting Bryan's contact information or anything he would like for social media down below in the show notes. If you guys want to watch over 65 episodes that we now have on the Roots podcast, you can find that in the show notes and links as well. If you guys want discounts on Thorn, Design for Sports, and many other food products and options, go ahead and hit my link tree there. You can find all that there with my social media as well. Bryan, again, appreciate you for coming on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate you.